It's really good to be here, and I might need to introduce myself. I'm Ken Ellis. I haven't spoken for 3 weeks, but it's really nice to see everyone. We had to be gone last weekend because of our grandsons, not our sons, our grandson's 4th birthday, and we took him to a zoo in Springfield, Missouri, the Dickerson Zoo. And we decided to take him on the little train ride there. And so we all got on there, and we noticed the name of the train. It was the Titus Express. And so our son named Titus, our grandson's named Titus, Joe. And we all rode on the Titus Express. We had a wonderful time. So I would encourage you to go there, Ryan. Take Titus there for him to ride. I admire people who survive real difficulties. And on the other hand, people who become kind of like victims, and they give up, and they want you to feel sorry for them. That's nothing to admire. I like what someone wrote about not giving up. He said this: how many a man has thrown up his hands at a time, and a little more effort, a little more patience would have achieved success. Sometimes prospects may seem darkest when really they are on the turn. A little more persistence, a little more effort, and what seemed hopeless failure may turn to glorious success. And so, to not give up is very important. To keep trying, to be faithful, to look to the future, to have hope, very important. I want to talk to you this morning about someone who's referred to as the greatest man of the East. And we don't remember him because he was healthy, wealthy, and wise. We notably remember him for a certain characteristic that he had, and that was that he persevered, that he endured, that he did not give up. And we find that the Lord's brother wrote about him, James, and he said this about him. He said, as you know, we consider blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. Job endured. It was not a smooth road of endurance for him. He had pains, he had doubts, he had misunderstandings, and during his road, it was very difficult. He suffered greatly, but he ultimately endured. He never gave up. I think, and I've seen this too often, you have too, the trouble with most people is that they stop trying in trying times. But trying times are no time to quit trying. Keep trying when others quit. Don't be saying, I think I'll just give up. The wise, they don't give up. Do not lie in wait like an outlaw against a righteous man's house. Do not raid his dwelling place. For though a righteous man falls 7 times, he rises again, but the wicked brought down by calamity. So says Proverbs 24. So Job was one of those righteous people. He faced great challenges. He got knocked down, losing his possessions. He got knocked down, losing his family. He got knocked down, losing his health. And it seems, in a sense, every time he got back up, he never quit. It's amazing how he responded to all of this. Job is an admirable, righteous man, a man of endurance. Job suffered. He really suffered. And when friends heard about the suffering that he was going through and all the losses that he experienced, they wanted to come and comfort him. And you know, we're going to talk about the friends of Job next week. One of the things I see in them that they came and they didn't say a word and they comforted him. Once they started talking, it was a different story. But when they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. He was suffering. He had already suffered much, losing all of his possessions, the loss of his children. He's suffering emotionally with grief. His wife's in despair. And now he's suffering physically to the point that his friends can barely recognize him. The descriptions in several passages tell us how he is suffering. He's suffering with inflamed, ulcerous sores, persistent itching, loss of appetite, difficulty in breathing, loss of weight, excruciating, continual pain, high fever with chills and discoloring of skin, as well as anxiety. His grief in losing almost everything, including his 10 grown children, and the despair of his wife in all of this. Why did Job suffer? You know, there's a proverb that says, he who sows wickedness reaps trouble, and the rod of his fury will be destroyed. It's not because he did any trouble. It wasn't because of any wickedness. He's suffering not because he has done selfish, hurtful things, but because he has done the opposite in his life. He's doing good. He's helping others. He doesn't know this is the reason for his suffering. He only knows that he has lost everything. But in spite of these hardships, he remains faithful and he doesn't give up. So it's not because he's done wicked, but it's because he did good, helping others. We find that it's also because he was pleasing to God. And also that God put his trust in him as a faithful servant. All of those things. And so first of all, let's just notice, because he did good. Does it help when we know that we're suffering because we're doing good, we're helping others? Does that help? Well, Peter thought it did. Peter's emphasizing that truth to those early Christians who were suffering all kinds of hardships in their life. And he wrote this, "But how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good, and you endure it, that is commendable before God." Commendable before God. And so why was he suffering? Well, we've seen it's the good that he was doing. That's part of it. And it was also because he was pleasing to God. Job's troubles came not because God was angry with him, but because God was pleased with him and proud of him. And when his blessings are in his life, and his life of living in the sunshine were taken from him, it was not God punishing him, but it was because God was putting his confidence, his trust in him. He had a blessed life in the sunshine. He remembers those days when God put his confidence in him, and God, even during his suffering, is still putting his confidence in him. I don't know that he realizes that. For example, in chapters 29, verses 2 and 3, he describes how he lived. How I long for the month, how I long, let me go back. How I long for the months gone by, for the days when God watched over me. When his lamp shone upon my head, and in his light I walked through darkness. We know more about why he was facing these difficulties than he did as he experienced them, because we have the insight of the book about Job. Satan slanders, at the beginning of this book, we find that Satan slanders Job's blameless character. And Job is truly a righteous man of integrity. Or is he just devoted to God because of all the blessings he's receiving? God comes to his defense, but it's in a very remarkable way. It ends up being through suffering. The brief introduction to Job goes as follows. Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." Satan says, "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord, and Satan strikes and destroys his wealth and possessions. Satan strikes and destroys his sons and daughters. And eventually he does strike his health. Here is the description of him before all this happened and how he lived his life. In the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. The word blameless means he was complete, well-behaved, he was genuine, he was a man of integrity. Despite his sufferings and accusations of his friends, Job doesn't imply that he is without sin, that he's sinless. In fact, he appeals to God saying this, you will call and I will answer you. You will long for the creature your hands have made. Surely then you will count my steps, but will not keep track of my sin. My offenses will be sealed up in a bag. You will cover over my sin. So it never implies he's sinless. He's perfect. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. And what I just read about all his possessions, he lost it all. He lost it all. Can you imagine what that would be like? Now, the only thing I can do is imagine. Imagine everything that you have right now and losing it. It's about as close as I can come. Job had a life at one time. It was a life in the sunshine. And this morning, in the remainder of this lesson, we'll look more closely at Job's life in the sunshine before he began to suffer, so that we can better understand how blameless and upright he was. I believe this will also help us grasp how exceptional his response to all that he endured was. All the hardships. And again, it wasn't because he was sowing wickedness and reaping trouble. It was because he was doing so much good. That's why. Remember when we look at Job's life, his calamities? They came not because he was selfish or hurtful, doing hurtful things to other people. It was just the opposite. It's because he was helping others and being such a generous person. In his last discussion with his friends, he reveals more about himself than the introduction gives, or anything he offers in his interaction with the so-called friends. He talked about his life in the sunshine when things were going well for him. And this is why Proverbs 14:9, where the word upright is used, is so descriptive of him. Fools mock at making amends for sin, but goodwill is found among the upright. Well, that describes him. Goodwill toward others. What he was doing with his life illustrates what it means to be blameless and upright. And when life was so good, how is he living his life? Paul gives an answer when he quotes Jesus. Paul is quoting what Jesus said. Remember the words the Lord Jesus himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. And when we get to Job chapter 29, Job finally talks about himself and how he was blessed, a blessing to others. He said, Whoever heard me spoke well of me, and those who saw me commended me, because I rescued the poor who cried for help, and the fatherless who had none to assist him. The man who was dying blessed me. I made the widow's heart sing. Why did people speak well of him? Well, it's like the Proverb 19, verse 22. What is desirable in a man is his kindness. And they spoke well of him because of his kindness in helping others, helping them in their needs, the many, many needs that he saw. So we can learn from Job, especially since Paul wrote this, about how we are to be as Christians, what we are created for, which is good works. For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. I like this illustration for what seems to be the Depression of the 1930s. It's about a boy whose parents gave the money to him to go get some food for the family. And the family didn't have much money. And what does the boy do? Well, a man sees a boy in desperation. He writes about what he sees by saying, a child whose nature would have hidden him, a child whose nature would have bidden him rejoice, as only childhood may, wept his heart out because his hand had lost some money. The loss was a very serious one, and he knew it. He was less afraid to face his parents than be overcome with misery at the thought of the harm he had done them. And I don't know, maybe the boy was older than this, but I see tears in that boy's eyes there. Money dropped by the wayside, and a whole family made wretched. What are the two descriptive terms for a state of civilization in which such a thing as this is possible? I put my hand into my pocket and wrought a $5 bill of miracle and gave it to him. Helping others helps, doesn't it? How I long for the months gone by, for the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone upon my head, and by his light I walked through darkness. The man who was dying blessed me. I made the widow's heart sing. I'm thinking about that. I made the widow's heart sing. A widow's heart is broken. She can't stop the tears. So many things need to be done which she can't do. She could be experiencing unbearable pain, and her needs are not being met. So can you picture Job doing something like this? Can you imagine him coming down the path with a well-loaded cart ready to alleviate at least physical needs? Giving her all of this food and giving her words of encouragement. I made the widow's heart sing, says Job. People listened to me expectantly, waiting in silence for my counsel. After I had spoken, they spoke no more. My words fell gently on their ears. They waited for me as for showers and drank in my words as the spring rain. When I smiled at them, they scarcely believed it. The light of my face was precious to them. Of course, there's not a detailed story about Job that we have. No real details. But when I was looking for a story that displayed God's wisdom, I came across a story that was highlighted, a story from 1987. It's a story of a young girl named Beth who began to have seizures in her kindergarten school year. And what happened? I could see Job doing what happened in this story. They became more frequent, having up to 101 day. And tests revealed she had a neurological disease that only affects one hemisphere of the brain. And the only remedy for her was surgery, where a surgeon would remove part of the brain, that section. But she got relief. She got comfort. How? From words. During her ordeal with seizures, she found comfort by hearing one voice, the voice of Mr. Rogers. And she never had a seizure while watching the 30 minutes of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Beth said, I found his voice comforting. I felt like he was talking to me and nobody else. So before surgery, her mother, Kathy, called the Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood office, the studio office, and explained to the secretary what was happening. She asked for a signed copy from Mr. Rogers, just to be sent. And a few minutes later, the secretary called back with a special message. Here is where generosity played an essential part in this young girl's life. The secretary asked